Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. This is Firoz Manji from Daraja Press. Welcome to Organizing in the Time of COVID. Today we're going to be discussing dispatches from the Rust Belt in the USA, particularly in Rockford, Illinois. Um, the northeastern and midwestern states of the U.S., which have been badly affected by the decline in heavy industry, are what in the U.S. referred to as the Rust Belt. My guest today is one of the activists involved in 815 Mutual Aid, which is a collective that is dedicated to providing mutual aid, food, medicine, care, and support in the Rockford area throughout the coronavirus crisis. Their view is that the crisis is a product of racialist capitalist system that they collectively oppose. They describe themselves as pro-feminist, pro-LGBTQIA, abolitionist, anti-racist, anti-colonial organization. In their work, they aim to center the most uh, marginalized in keeping with Black feminist traditions of organizing. They're committed to horizontal, non-hierarchical, decentralized organizing models and are against state collaboration in any way, which means they don't work with the police, ICE, courts, or government agencies. And their projects involve freedom farms, abolitionist organizing, and mutual aid work. In order to protect the identity of our interviewee, I'll refer to him as L, and he's kept his video off. But I'm sure we will have some really interesting discussions here. Uh, Welcome to Organizing the Time of COVID, L. Help us understand the meaning of the term Rust Belt. Where does this come from?
Yeah, sure. The Rust Belt is kind of it's an informal term for a region of the United States that's kind of been experiencing industrial decline since around 1980. It Rust refers specifically to deindustrialization, economic decline, population loss, and what some would describe as urban decay. Though I have some issues with that. The Rust Belt begins in central New York and goes west through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, the lower peninsula of Michigan, and ends in northern Illinois, eastern Iowa, and southeast Wisconsin. Um, and what has you know really what you've seen kind of develop within since a lot of those jobs have left has been really just kind of a shift towards services, and then also just rising poverty and declining populations in these areas.
Right, and so
Um,
you've got this mutual aid network established called 815. Tell us some more about it. Why 815? What does that mean?
Yeah, so 815 is a reference to the area code. So one of the things that we had felt with some of our members, most of our members are located in the rock, specifically in the Rockford city, but there's also like some surrounding cities that we were involved in. So we wanted to do 815 as being kind of a northern, based in kind of northern Illinois. That was kind of our orientation.
Right. So are you from Rockford, or what's your connection with it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I grew up in Rockford. I was politicized primarily through struggles here. The police brutality. There's a brother who shot outside of my high school, and I was kind of politicized through that struggle. And So that was kind of my entry point into kind of radical politics. And I remember also being very impacted by the Ferguson Rebellion, which happened in um, St. Louis, which is an area that's also similar in terms of like the rebel nature. So that was kind of how I got involved with things. Now I've grown up in Rockford most of my life.
Right. And so what are the major priorities that you are working on in terms of dealing with the effect of COVID-19?
Yeah, so the orientation of the collective was initially towards mutual aid, right? But also understanding that mutual aid fundamentally has to be about breaking down systems of racial capitalism and systems of settler colonialism. And I think that that was kind of the issue that a lot of our members in our collective had taken issue with, as kind of mutual aid as this term kind of is getting popularized, and I would actually view it as kind of co-opted by the state. You have all of these like, state politicians and talking about mutual aid, and we felt that it was really important to make sure that we located our own tradition as within kind of a radical tradition that opposed like supremacy and capitalism. um, and also located mutual aid. Many of us came out of kind of abolitionist organizing, which against the police and against the prisons, and so we wanted to make sure that we were kind of also making sure that we were doing mutual aid within and the prisons, and which has kind of if you talk about kind of the Rust Belt, one of the few industries that has really you know majorly increased, right, with the decline kind of industrialization, with deindustrialization and population loss. What you've actually seen as an increase in kind of policing and prisons as a result, to kind of manage the populations, and also as a result of kind of the war on drugs coming out of kind of like the 1980s, which it can really be, viewed now by most people as very clearly like a war on Black people, and now is even being extended in some ways. That incarceration is being extended into just like poor communities in general, but starts as initially a war on Black people um, within the United States, and that is very clear within Rockford.
So there's been a growth in incarceration of people in and around Rockford. So are these privatized prisons? What are they?
So it's not a privatized prison, but what you have is you have the Winnebago County Jail, right? And the Winnebago County Jail is the second largest jail in the state, other than the Cook County Jail in Chicago. And most of the conditions within the Winnebago County Jail have been reported to be very, very bad. There have been multiple deaths. There's of people that are incarcerated there. There's usually there's been a couple of deaths in the last couple of years, and a number of lawsuits. And there was the jail's facility is relatively new. It was built, I believe, in 2005, but actually, the conditions within the jail are actually still very, very bad, and there's not a lot of it's different than many other cities, because I feel like within other cities you have you know a degree of like kind of pushback, but there hasn't been a lot of pushback upon like kind of like what the jail has been doing. The conditions in the jail, obviously COVID have only gotten worse. Yeah, but the jail is the primary focus here in terms of like incarceration. And you can be incarcerated similar to Ferguson and a lot of other like cities and predominantly Black municipalities, is that you'll get thrown into jail, and the bond for relatively minor so-called minor offenses. But as abolitionists, we kind of view that we understand that prisons fundamentally, when they relate back to the broader like United system, are fundamentally like racist institutions, right? So that as long as prisons exist, they will be filled with black, indigenous, brown, and poor people. So we fundamentally oppose kind of the prison system and what Winnebago County Jail represents, and all the brutality inherent in the jail.
So you were saying that there's a lot of issues related to the police harassing people, organizing to get people into jail themselves. What's your experience of the way in which the police are operating?
Yeah, so there's been because of kind of the economic disparity here and a lot of economic insecurity that's as a result of kind of COVID. There's been an increase in kind of intra-communal violence within you know in Rockford, right? So the response really from the police has been real increase and kind of like crackdown in terms of policing, like stopping people on the west side, which is primarily like black side of town, right? And just harassing a lot of like youth, black youth, and just kind of like that sort of like routine things, and the the police chief, uh, Dan O'Shea, I believe is his name. He has said some pretty alarming statements about how the police department is going to hunt down the lawless criminals, and really use this very like really racialist language, and um, Rockford, has a long history of kind of police brutality. There was a Mark Barmore was killed back in 2009 by the Rockford Police Department, and that was kind of a national headline news, right? But then kind of Rockford has kind of tried to the city and the police have kind of tried to act as if there was like accountability, and they've created this it's called a Winnebago County task force, which is but the task force is supposed to investigate, kind of the integrity of police shootings and make sure that the police are accountable. But the task force is made up of entirely of police anyway. It's not any sort of like community board that's accountable to community. And even as an abolitionist, we would even oppose a community board, because fundamentally, as long as the police um, exist, like they're going to be undemocratic, because they fundamentally represent and protect the interest of capital and the interest of white supremacy and the interest of settler colonialism.
So tell us something more
so that's
about.
been a big thing here.
Sorry, yeah. Tell us something about the way in which COVID has affected the population in Rockford, and then perhaps tell us how it's affected for those who are incarcerated in the prisons.
I'm sorry, I kind of missed what you said. It like
Oh
skipped
yeah,
over a
I
little bit. Could
just
you repeat the
sorry.
question? I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. Want to get some understanding of the extent that which COVID-19 has affected the population, and then perhaps also give us some idea of its effects amongst those who are incarcerated.
Sure. Okay, I'll talk a little bit on. I think what you said was kind of how COVID-19's been impacting the population. Yeah. So like across the United States, the predominant people that have been affected and are dying from coronavirus have been Black people, and that is also true within Rockford, from what I understand. And then I think this is also important to understand how this has kind of impacted the jail, right? Basically, across the country and in Rockford as well, there's been kind of calls for decarceration, effectively saying that people are not safe in prison, people are not safe in jail, and should be released. And there have been demonstrations. There was a demonstration here in Rockford on May Day around this, decarcerating, right? But the response, at least here in Rockford, from jail authorities has been that um, people are so-called safer inside of the prisons, right? And the issue, right, with this is that you can't socially distance inside of a jail. It's impossible to socially distance inside of a jail. And in terms of the conditions, for a while, people inside of Winnebago County Jail didn't even have access to masks. They didn't have access to any sort of like cleaning supplies to clean the jail. And from what I understand, the jail authorities were also covering up, because the people bringing the jail inside of the people bringing the virus inside of the jail are not the people that are incarcerated there. It is the guards, right? And so a guard had contracted a case of COVID, and basically, they were trying to like hush it up, and make sure that people didn't know that this guard had COVID-19. And there have been increases in cases. I mean, it's also hard to know, right? Because historically, in contemporary, like it's the Winnebago County Jail has been very doesn't really like allow a lot of access to information about what's going on with the population inside, and like what they've been doing. And so it's unclear to us, really how many cases there actually are, because the jail will say one thing, and then families and like supporters will talk to people on the inside, and they'll say a different thing. And I think that that's a really important thing to kind of understand, is that there's what the jail and the narrative that kind of the sheriff's office is putting forward is very different than kind of the narrative that that we talk to when we talk to people that are actually directly impacted, who are incarcerated. um, and I think the other thing to understand too is that Rockford, right, most of the work here in Rockford is the service industry, right? It's either people work in the service industry, or people are working um, at the Rockford Public School District, right? And many of the jobs with though a lot of those jobs are now being either cut, or those jobs are being cut, or those jobs are being uh just like people are being let go, right? So it's very hard, when you have like a lot of jobs that are very essential to people's like livelihood, and they're just being kind of like dropped, and with none of the benefits that a lot of these people who have been working these jobs for years. And so that's been, I think, a real struggle here, has been around that. And I think that's part of why we felt that mutual aid was so important, was because to try and do some community support work, to give people, kind of the way the Black Panther Party kind of talked about it, as kind of survival programs, right? To kind of do that, and then also build power kind of against the state and against capital, kind of has been our orientation. Um, yeah, and I think that that's like a really important, again, like it's a really important point to point out, is that kind of like in the Rust Belt, you already have kind of declining populations, and poverty, and kind of not a lot of like you know uh, jobs that are going to be super consistent. It's mostly service industry, right? Like, and so that's been the real struggle. And then the other thing I would also talk about, right, is that um, all of the support that the city's been doing, like relief that the city's been doing, has been focused entirely on kind of business owners, right? It hasn't actually been focused on like workers or people who rent, right? It's actually been focused entirely on business owners, right? And so you haven't seen the city do anything specifically to support renters, and a large amount of people in Rockford rent. So you haven't seen any sort of support for that in specific. Um, and there's also a lot of the smaller business owners kind of push a lot of the kind of the policies here, and you kind of control kind of how the city runs. And so we've seen that is abundantly clear that this as it reopens, it's going to be reopening specifically for kind of the industries here, and it's not going to be a reopen that is kind of formed by supporting like the working class and the Black working class specifically within Rockford.
So to what extent do you think the coronavirus has helped lift the veil and for people to understand much better the actual nature of capitalist USA?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been very revealing, especially to a lot of us within our collective about kind of how the capitalist system really especially within this kind of heightened era of kind of neoliberalism really is not going to be creating any sort of social welfare state to kind of support workers and to support um, you know uh, Black, brown, and working class people. I think that that's like abundantly clear from this, um, kind of the way that the governments have reacted to COVID on a statewide level and even local level, and I think that that's a really important thing to kind of point out. And I think that also the mutual aid, organizing has been really encouraging because it kind of has shown that there is a way forward, right? That could, understanding that mutual aid is a new way of relating to life, and it's a new way of relating to people, a new way of relating to community. And I think that's part of why what we've been trying to do as well has been trying to start some Rockford. There's a lot of abandoned lots, because a lot of the housing, a lot of the houses get knocked down by the city, right? So one of the things we've been trying to do is trying to build some community gardens locally so that people can actually have access directly to food, because often, especially on the west side, which is primarily the black side of town, there's not a lot of access, not a lot of access to food on the west side. So what we've been trying to work on, right, has actually been building kind of community gardens and community food projects, right, so that people actually within neighborhoods can actually have access to food and be involved in kind of cultivation of that food, right, and fresh food, right, grown organically. And so that's been one of the things we've also been trying to work on. And I think that once again, the most exciting thing about this whole, in many ways, as horrible as the COVID crisis is, what we are seeing it really is a response. I think especially the mutual aid and especially the abolitionist organizing that's been happening locally, but also across the country. It's abundantly clear, right, that uh, the the response to there is another way forward, right, and that social movements that are grounded in um, kind of mutual aid and abolitionist values are really going to be the way forward, rather than, I feel like within the last year there's been a lot of electoral opportunism on the left here in the United States. You've seen a lot of engagement with like the Bernie Sanders campaign, and it's been very clear how that campaign failed, right? And so what's so exciting, right, that is what we're seeing is that actually there is another politic, right? Is that you can actually, there's a way to engage politically that doesn't kind of only exist in this kind of like form of the state. And I think that that's been a really exciting thing, in terms of lifting back kind of the veil of like kind of what capitalism is, and kind of how the healthcare industry is not really doing anything. And one of the things that specifically in Rockford I'll talk on is what we've seen here um, is that one of the hospitals, Mercy Health, has actually refused. And this is when you talk about um, kind of one of the issues, right, is that Mercy Health actually, which is a for-profit, health, a for-profit like hospital, right, has actually rejected, I believe, I believe they have. basically rejected certain types of health insurance. So, you know, um, basically, like by rejecting, they've rejected certain types of health insurance, right? And it's very clear, right, that these healthcare, um, the healthcare industry is really very clearly, I think it's abundantly clear with everything that's happening. The healthcare industry is totally rooted in kind of capitalist logics and not actually logics about, caring for people, right? And I think that that's been a really that's a big thing that's been abundantly clear too from,
So
and they've also
it,
been one of the other, yeah,
go on, go on, go on.
um, one Yeah, yeah, and one of the other things too, I would say too, we have a few members in our collective, and you know, one of the things that all this Mercy Health have done is they've actually slashed the some of the salaries for some of the the employees um, for some of the slash some of the salary of the employees in in healthcare. So I mean, it's like abundantly clear that what this is totally about cutting costs and kind of sacrificing the need and the health of like workers for the good, for the interests of capital.
So, I mean, in many states, it's the black and brown workers, to use the language of currently used, who are on the front line, who are the health people, who are the cleaners, and so on, the ones who are most likely to get exposed. Is that the same case in Rockford?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. That definitely is the case. Um, yeah, yeah, and I think that in some ways yeah, I think that that's definitely the case, and I think that you know, understanding that like healthcare workers are literally like risking their lives and still in a lot of cases from these different companies kind of being treated very unfairly with like lack of benefits and lack of all these like very essential things. I think that's like a really important kind of thing to hammer in, right? Is that fundamentally these kind of healthcare industry kind of operates off of a basis of profit, right? And I think that that's abundantly clear with kind of the coronavirus.
Right. So, one of the we spoke to somebody from Montreal in Quebec in Canada this morning, and one of the things that he pointed out was that this crisis is helping to lift the veil of many people, and especially amongst the migrant and immigrant communities, the black and brown communities, are now beginning to organize. Um, can you comment more on the kind of organizing, community-based organizing that is beginning to happen, if at all, in Rockford?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of like kind of stuff, there was recently on May Day, there was a demonstration to release people that were in the jail, right? And that was a demonstration that was black folks were predominantly incarcerated in the jail, and with Rockford, there's been a long history of kind of police repression of protests. You've seen activists harassed by the police for organizing Black Lives Matter demonstrations. There's a very long history of repression here. Right, so protests in Rockford are very infrequent, but it's been very encouraging to actually see a lot of a building kind of there's been a lot of building around kind of issues of incarceration and a lot of activism around that. There's been call-in campaigns and and car demonstrations, and I think that I think that the kind of the realities of kind of like what you know the conditions within jails is really there's actually a real movement here in a way that I don't think that there was um you know uh a year 6 months ago. But I think that when I think that we're seeing kind of material conditions like shift in some ways. So I think that that's been like a really important thing to kind of understand, and to also understand that fundamentally, like our group, the way we view our politics is that mass movement struggle is going to happen. And it's important to like participate actively in that, right? And so I think that we've seen more just like around, especially around I think issues of incarceration. I don't know if there have ever been in Rockford specifically. I don't know if there have ever been protests outside around conditions inside the jail. I don't know if that's ever happened. So I mean, it's kind of a big deal. And I think that that's something I don't know if I'm trying to hammer in, right? Like it's like what's different about Rockford as compared to like a lot of like larger metropolitan areas. There aren't a lot of protests here. There's not a lot of like political activity that doesn't exist outside of political parties, right? And so it's actually super encouraging to actually see a lot of kind of like grassroots organizing that's taking part in kind of like direct action, taking part in kind of mutual aid, right? Rather than whether that's creating community gardens, whether that's direct actions, to protest kind of conditions inside the jail. And whether that's one of the things that our collective's been doing is we've been doing kind of like fundraising around doing a commissary drive. Or we've been in contact with a number of people inside the jail, and one of the things that the jail has kind of been doing has been gouging the prices for commissary, right? And so one of the things we've been trying to do is trying to raise money so that we can send money into the jail, so that people are able to like buy soap, right, which is not being provided, and the prices are gouged. So but yeah, there's been a lot of like very encouraging organizing stuff that's been happening as a result in some ways of COVID here specifically.
Can you? I don't know that part of the world, but what kind of indigenous populations are organizing, the First Nations and so on? What contact do you have with them?
Yeah, so I haven't in terms of indigenous organizing, like indigenous organizers, I am not like um super personally, like I don't want to speak on it too much. Like I'm not personally um familiar with it has been one of our goals, but I'm not super familiar with the indigenous communities like in Rockford. I know that there is a local um like festival that happens like every year. I haven't had a chance to connect with those folks. I know that there was a lot of solidarity. I don't believe it was organized by like folks that were indigenous, but there was a lot of solidarity around the Standing Rock campaign that happened a couple of years ago. There was a bank shutdown in Rockford, and there was a good amount of fundraising that was sent out to Standing Rock. But I'm not. There aren't. Specifically in Rockford, I don't think there's like a huge indigenous community, but I'm not super familiar on that. So
Okay. One of the things that organizations like Cooperation Jackson and others from Mississippi have been organizing is been on May the 1st was a strike call across the country with caravans and so on being organized. And they're now calling for the first of every month, 1st of June, 1st of July, and so on, to increase these kind of strike actions. Um, is this something that you participated in?
yeah, so I mean, we did participate in a May 1st action, which was a car demonstration outside the Winnebago County Jail. And that was to free them all. And I think that it's important. I think moving forward, especially in Rockford, one of the things, and I just think nationally that needs to be kind of talked about is that, with all of the kind of now that kind of states and Illinois and Rockford is kind of reopening, right? One of the things that I think that is really important moving forward is going to be doing eviction defense and moving forward towards trying to stop evictions from happening, because I have a feeling that now that things are going to be reopening, landlords are going to be coming for people for money that they do not have, right? So I think that organizing around kind of eviction defense and rent, um, the words rent, uh,
Rent strikes.
I'm forgetting the word. Uh,
Rent strikes.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, rent strikes and rent reductions is going to be really important thing moving forward. There's been a group that's been agitating for that here in Rockford, and we've obviously supported the call for that as well, because we view, we obviously said we've supported the call for that as well. So hopefully, we'll see some car demonstrations, manifest like that. And I know that there's been some stuff in Chicago, and I think that one of the most important things we think here is compared to other cities is that and we're kind of playing catch up, right? Is that there's really a need for like a tenants union or a tenants organization that actually is organizing renters around these issues. So I hope to see that manifest in the next couple of weeks and months. And I think that there's been understanding that there's a bunch of different demands, right? And we've been kind of focused more on the abolitionist side, but I do think that fundamentally the three most important kind of things across the country to emphasize have kind of been kind of abolitionist demands to free them all, rent striking, and making sure that there's a right to housing, and then fundamentally, focusing upon the emphasis on kind of mutual aid and making sure that people have access to food. And I think those are like some of the most important issues in terms of organizing that need to be kind of highlighted right now.
Great. If there was one final message that you would like to convey to people who are watching the show, what would that be?
Yeah, in terms of, I guess, a final message, yeah, I think that just to like kind of articulate our politics, right, is that you know, it COVID represents, I think, a new way forward for radical movements, and I think that um, what we've seen, with how Rockford, kind of how Rockford's the state is going to react, in kind of these neoliberal oppressive ways by increasing the police state and increasing repression, right? And so the response, right, is that we need to deepen our own resistance, deepen our own mutual aid, deepen our own organizing within our own communities, and building, strong kind of principled collectives to kind of push back against kind of the neoliberal, because I think that there is going to be kind of a neoliberal impetus that we're kind of seeing moving forward with all of this. And I think that making sure we organize around mutual aid, around abolition, and centering incarcerated people, centering the black working class, right? All of those things are really essential, and centering pushback against settler colonialism. All of those things are going to be super important, to combating COVID, and also what
Hello? Hello?
comes next after.
Sorry, we lost you there. You said also.
I think, yeah, and also just pushing back against, you know, make, making sure that we push back against kind of the neoliberal logics that are going to kind of follow right after this, the COVID crisis is over, and we do that, through mutual aid, through organizing and centering incarcerated people, and through fundamentally, kind of shifting the lists, and state logics, right, and engaging and kind of organizing within our communities.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this show. It's been really interesting to get an insight into part of the world that we don't often hear from. And so, Al, I'd really like to thank you for taking time in your day to join us here. I hope that
Yeah,
we'll
thank you
keep
so
in
much.
touch. It's been great to talk with you. Uh, And let's keep in touch, and perhaps we get an update from you a little while down the road.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Great. Well, you take care, look after yourself, and good luck with the organizing that you're doing. Um, well, I'm sure lots of solidarity will be
All right, yeah,
expressed.
sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, you take care, and we'll be in touch again. I've been speaking to Elle, who's a member of a collective known as 815 Mutual Aid Network. This is Firoz Manji signing off from organizing in the time of COVID for this weekend. We'll be back again next week. Thank you for watching the show. I'm signing off now.